Sometimes the most unexpected encounters happen when we're at our lowest point. When life has stripped away everything we thought we knew about ourselves, when the weight of our struggles feels too heavy to bear alone, fate has a way of placing exactly the right person in our path. This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, a woman whose world crumbled in a single phone call, and Jake Thompson, a weathered cowboy who learned that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't facing danger, it's opening your heart to a stranger's pain. What began as a chance meeting on a dusty Texas highway would become a journey of healing, hope, and the kind of human connection that reminds us why we were never meant to walk through life's darkest valleys alone. This is their story, raw, real, and proof that sometimes the people who save us are the ones we least expect to meet. Sarah Mitchell stared at the cell phone in her trembling hand, the doctor's words still echoing in her mind like a cruel song on repeat. Stage 4. Inoperable. 6 months, maybe less. The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the kitchen table of her small Austin apartment, the sound startling her back to a reality she wasn't ready to face. 3 days ago, she had been planning her wedding to David, her fiancé of 2 years. They had finally picked a venue, chosen the flowers, and sent out save-the-date cards. 3 days ago, her biggest worry was whether to serve chicken or salmon at the reception. Now, she couldn't even remember what food tasted like. Everything had lost its flavor the moment Dr. Reeves delivered the diagnosis that shattered her world into a million irreparable pieces. The apartment felt suffocating suddenly, filled with wedding magazines and cake samples that now seemed like artifacts from someone else's life. Sarah grabbed her keys and walked out, not bothering to lock the door behind her. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to be anywhere but here, surrounded by dreams that would never come true. Her car seemed to drive itself, taking familiar turns without conscious thought. Before she knew it, she was on Highway 35, heading north toward nowhere in particular. The Austin skyline faded in her rearview mirror, replaced by rolling hills and endless Texas sky. For the first time in days, she could breathe without feeling like her chest was in a vice. She drove for hours, stopping only for gas and coffee she couldn't taste. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that would have taken her breath away under different circumstances. Now, even nature's beauty felt like a mockery. How could the world continue to be beautiful when her world was ending? By the time her gaslight came on again, she was somewhere outside a town called Cedar Creek, population 2,847 according to the weathered sign by the roadside. The gas station was one of those old-fashioned ones with a single pump and a screen door that squeaked when she pushed it open. The elderly man behind the counter looked up from his newspaper and smiled. "Evening, miss. Passing through?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She prepaid for gas and bought a bottle of water, avoiding the man's kind eyes. Outside, as she pumped gas into her small sedan, she noticed storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of rain and something else, hay, maybe, or wildflowers. She was about to get back in her car when the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes, it became a downpour, the kind of sudden Texas storm that turns roads into rivers and makes driving dangerous. She sat in her car, watching the rain pound against her windshield, and realized she had no idea where she was going or why she was running. The rain didn't let up for over an hour. When it finally began to ease, Sarah's phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and her heart clenched. She had left without telling him about the diagnosis. She had driven away from everything and everyone who cared about her, including the man who loved her enough to want to spend the rest of his life with her. Only now, that life had been cut tragically short. She let the call go to voicemail, then another, and another. Each unanswered ring felt like another bridge burning behind her. How could she tell David that their future together had been reduced to months instead of decades? How could she ask him to watch her die when they had planned to watch each other grow old? As darkness settled over the small town, Sarah realized she couldn't drive anymore. Her hands were shaking, her vision blurry from unshed tears, and her gas tank was running low again. She needed to find somewhere to stay for the night, somewhere to figure out what came next. The motel she found was typical of small Texas towns, single-story, neon sign flickering intermittently, and a parking lot with more potholes than smooth pavement. The desk clerk, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and suspicious eyes, looked Sarah up and down before sliding a registration form across the scarred wooden counter. "You okay, honey?" the woman asked, her voice softer than her appearance suggested. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah almost laughed at the irony. She had seen a ghost, her own future, vanishing like smoke. "I'm fine," she lied, filling out the form with shaking hands. "Just tired." The room was clean but sparse, a bed with a faded floral comforter, a small table with 2 chairs, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and, finally, allowed herself to cry. Not the dignified, silent tears she had been holding back all day, but raw, ugly sobs that came from somewhere deep in her chest. She cried for the wedding that would never happen, for the children she would never have, for the life she had planned but would never live. She cried for David, who deserved better than watching the woman he loved waste away. She cried for her parents, who had already buried one child and now would have to bury another. Most of all, she cried for herself, for the unfairness of it all, for the dreams that had been ripped away, for the time she would never have. When the tears finally stopped, Sarah felt empty, hollowed out like an old tree. She lay back on the scratchy motel bedspread and stared at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the sounds of the small town settling into night. Somewhere a dog barked. A truck rumbled past on the highway. Normal sounds of normal life continuing despite her personal apocalypse. She must have dozed off, because the next thing she knew, sunlight was streaming through the thin curtains, and her phone was buzzing insistently on the nightstand. 17 missed calls from David, 12 from her best friend Maria, and 6 from her mother. The voicemails painted a picture of growing concern and confusion. Where was she? Why wasn't she answering? David's voice in the last message was strained with worry. "Sarah, please call me back. I don't know what's wrong, but whatever it is, we can face it together. I love you. Please come home." The words hit her like a physical blow. Together. If only it were that simple. If only love could cure cancer or stop time or give them the lifetime they had planned. But love, she was learning, had limits. Love couldn't perform miracles or change medical facts. Love could only watch helplessly as everything it cherished slipped away. She turned off her phone and walked to the window. The motel parking lot was mostly empty except for her car and a dusty pickup truck with ranch plates. Beyond the parking lot, she could see rolling hills dotted with cattle and horses. It was beautiful in a stark, honest way that reminded her why she had always loved Texas. The land didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was, sometimes harsh, sometimes gentle, but always real. In the harsh morning light, her escape plan seemed foolish. She couldn't run from cancer any more than she could run from her own shadow. But she also couldn't face going home, couldn't bear to see the look in David's eyes when she told him the truth. She was trapped between a past she couldn't return to and a future she couldn't face. Sarah checked out of the motel and got back in her car, still with no clear destination in mind. She drove slowly through Cedar Creek, taking in the details of the small town, the courthouse with its clock tower, the diner with checkered curtains in the windows, the feed store with sacks of grain stacked on the front porch. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where life moved at a different pace, where people still waved at strangers passing through. On the outskirts of town, her car began to make a strange rattling sound. She pulled over and popped the hood, but mechanical problems had never been her forte. The engine looked like a puzzle written in a foreign language. She was staring helplessly at the maze of hoses and belts when she heard footsteps on the gravel behind her. "Having trouble, ma'am?" She turned to see a man walking toward her from the direction of a nearby ranch. He was tall and lean, wearing faded jeans, scuffed boots, and a hat that had seen better days. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that spoke of long hours outdoors. He looked like he had stepped out of a country song, the quintessential Texas cowboy. "I think something's wrong with my engine," Sarah said, wiping her hands on her jeans. "It started making this awful noise." The man nodded and looked under the hood, his movements efficient and confident. "Jake Thompson," he said, not looking up from the engine. "And you've got a busted radiator hose." Lucky you broke down here instead of out on the highway in this heat. Sarah Mitchell, she replied automatically. Is it expensive to fix? Jake straightened up and looked at her directly for the first time. His eyes were gray-green, like sagebrush, and surprisingly kind. Not expensive, but you'll need to get it to a mechanic. Roy's garage is back in town, but he won't be open until Monday. Today being Saturday and all. The words hit her like another blow. Stuck. She was stuck in a town where she knew no one, with nowhere to go and no way to get there even if she did. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent yesterday running from her problems, and now she was literally unable to run any further. I could give you a ride back to town, Jake offered, seeming to sense her distress. Help you figure out what to do next. Sarah looked at this stranger who was offering kindness to someone he didn't know, and, for a moment, she felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, that had already happened, but crack in a different way, like ice beginning to thaw. That's very kind of you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I don't want to be a burden. Jake tipped his hat back slightly and studied her face. Whatever he saw there made his expression soften. Ma'am, helping a stranded traveler isn't a burden. It's just what decent folks do. As Sarah gathered her purse from the car, she caught sight of herself in the side mirror. She looked like a woman on the edge of falling apart, which, she supposed, was exactly what she was. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed, and her clothes wrinkled from sleeping in them. She looked like someone who had been running from something, which was also exactly what she had been doing. Jake's truck was old but well-maintained, with worn leather seats and the lingering scent of hay and honest work. As they drove back toward Cedar Creek, he didn't push her to talk, seeming to understand that she needed space to breathe. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the rumble of the engine and the whisper of wind through the open windows. You picked a good place to break down, Jake said finally, as they approached the town limits. Cedar Creek's got good people. They'll take care of you until you can get back on the road. Sarah almost laughed at the bitter irony of his words. Take care of you until you can get back on the road. If only he knew that her road was a dead end, that no amount of care could change her destination. But she simply nodded and stared out at the passing scenery, the small Texas town that had accidentally become her refuge. Neither of them could have known that this chance meeting would change both of their lives forever, that Sarah's breakdown, both mechanical and emotional, would lead to a connection neither of them saw coming. Sometimes the most important journeys begin not when we know where we're going, but when we finally admit that we're lost. Jake dropped Sarah off at the same motel where she had spent the previous night, promising to check on her car situation first thing Monday morning. As his truck disappeared down Main Street, Sarah felt the loneliness settle around her shoulders like a heavy coat. She had managed to avoid thinking about her situation for the brief time she was in his presence, but now reality came crashing back with renewed force. Her phone had been buzzing constantly throughout the day, and she finally turned it on to find 43 missed calls and countless text messages. David's messages had evolved from worried to frantic to something approaching panic. Her mother had apparently called David when Sarah didn't answer her phone, and now both families were mobilizing what looked like a small-scale search party. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through the messages. Each one was a reminder of how many people cared about her, how many lives would be devastated by her news. The weight of their love felt crushing rather than comforting. How do you tell the people who mean everything to you that you're dying? How do you find the words for something so impossible? She sat on the motel bed and tried to compose a text message that would explain her absence without revealing the truth she wasn't ready to share. Everything she typed sounded wrong, either too casual or too dramatic, either dishonest or devastating. Finally, she settled on something simple: I'm safe. Need some time to think. Will call soon. I love you all. The response was immediate. David called within seconds, but she let it go to voicemail. Then, her mother called, then, Maria, then, David again. The phone rang so insistently that she finally turned it off and threw it into her purse, as if that could somehow muffle the demands of the world she had left behind. That evening, Sarah walked through Cedar Creek as the sun set behind the courthouse clock tower. The small town had a timeless quality in the golden hour, with porch lights beginning to twinkle and the sound of families gathering for dinner drifting from open windows. She passed the diner where she had eaten a meal she couldn't taste, the library with its hand-painted sign, the flower shop where buckets of wildflowers sat on the front steps like colorful sentries. At the edge of town, she found herself at a small cemetery, its weathered headstones casting long shadows in the fading light. She wandered among them, reading names and dates, calculating the years each person had been given. Some had lived long lives, 80, 90, even 100 years. Others had been cut short, children who never saw adulthood, young parents who never watched their babies grow up, middle-aged people like herself who had their stories ended mid-sentence. She found herself stopping at the grave of a woman named Elizabeth Harper, who had lived from 1985 to 2019. 34 years old when she died, just 2 years older than Sarah was now. Someone had left fresh flowers on the grave, yellow roses that hadn't yet begun to wilt. A daughter, maybe, or a sister who still missed her. "I wonder what you would have done," Sarah whispered to the headstone. "If you had known it was coming, would you have spent your last months differently?" The cemetery didn't answer, but, standing there among all those completed lives, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The panic that had been driving her for the past 3 days began to settle into something heavier but more manageable. Grief, maybe, or acceptance. She wasn't sure what to call it, but it felt like the first honest emotion she had allowed herself since the diagnosis. Sunday morning brought another call from Jake Thompson. Sarah had given him her number in case there were any developments with her car, but she hadn't expected to hear from him so soon. "Morning, Sarah. I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all," she said, surprised by how glad she was to hear his voice. "Any news about my car?" "Well, I talked to Roy yesterday evening, and he can fix it, but he'll need to order the part. Might take until Wednesday or Thursday." "I know that's not what you wanted to hear." Sarah almost laughed. A few more days trapped in Cedar Creek seemed like the least of her problems now. "It's okay. I guess I'm not in as much of a hurry as I thought I was." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you all right? You seemed like someone who was carrying more weight than a broken-down car." The question caught her off guard. In the past 3 days, dozens of people had asked if she was okay, but they had asked because they were supposed to, because it was what you said to someone who wasn't answering their phone. Jake asked like he genuinely wanted to know the answer. "I've been better," she said finally, which was the most honest thing she had said to anyone in days. "Would you like some company? I was planning to ride out and check on the cattle this morning, and it's nice country. Sometimes a change of scenery helps when life gets complicated." Sarah found herself saying yes before she had fully decided. Something about Jake's quiet steadiness made her want to trust him, even though they were still essentially strangers. An hour later, he picked her up at the motel in a different truck, this one with a horse trailer attached. "I hope you're not afraid of horses," he said as they drove toward his ranch. "My girl Buttercup is as gentle as they come, but some folks are nervous around anything bigger than a house cat." "I rode when I was younger," Sarah said, surprised to find herself thinking about her childhood riding lessons. It had been years since those memories had surfaced, weekend trips to her aunt's farm outside Houston, the smell of hay and leather, the feeling of freedom that came with cantering across an open field. Jake's ranch was exactly what she had imagined a Texas cattle operation would look like: weathered buildings, endless pastures, and a big sky that seemed to stretch all the way to eternity. He introduced her to Buttercup, a paint mare with kind eyes and a patient disposition, and, to his own horse, a sorrel gelding named Red who clearly adored his owner. As they rode through the pastures, Jake pointed out landmarks: the creek that ran along the southern boundary of his property, the old oak tree where his grandfather used to eat lunch during roundups, the hill that offered the best view of the county on clear days. He talked about the land like it was a living thing, something to be cared for rather than simply owned. "My family's had this place for 4 generations, he said as they paused to let the horses drink from the creek. "My great-grandfather homesteaded it back in 1923. It's not the biggest spread in the county, but it's home. Do you ever want to leave?" Sarah asked. "Go see what else is out there?" Jake was quiet for a moment, watching Red lower his head to the water. "I did leave, actually. Right after high school. Went to college in Austin, got a business degree, worked for a big corporation in Dallas for about 5 years. Made good money, had a corner office, the whole 9 yards. What brought you back? My dad got sick. Cancer. The word hit Sarah like a physical blow, and she must have made some sound because Jake looked at her with concern. You okay? She nodded, not trusting her voice. The irony was almost unbearable. Here was someone who had also been touched by the disease that was destroying her own life, someone who understood what it meant to watch someone you love face their mortality. It was hard, Jake continued, his voice gentle. Dad had always been this larger-than-life figure, you know? The kind of man who could fix anything, handle any crisis. Seeing him get weak, watching him struggle, it changed my perspective on a lot of things. Did he? Sarah couldn't finish the question. He pulled through, actually. Had surgery, did chemo, and it's been 5 years now with no signs of recurrence. But those months when we didn't know, they taught me what really mattered. The corner office and the big salary didn't seem so important anymore. Family did. This place did. The simple things. They rode in silence for a while after that, both lost in their own thoughts. Sarah found herself envying Jake's father, not for getting sick, but for surviving it. For getting to see 5 more years of sunrises over his family's land, 5 more years of his son's company, 5 more years of life. As they headed back toward the ranch house, Jake seemed to sense her mood. Sarah, I don't know what's troubling you, and I'm not the type to pry. But I've learned that most burdens get lighter when they're shared. If you ever want to talk about whatever's weighing on you, I'm a pretty good listener. The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Here was this man who barely knew her, offering to share the weight of problems he couldn't even imagine. For a moment, she wanted to tell him everything about the diagnosis, about running away from David, about the fear that kept her awake at night and the despair that followed her like a shadow. Instead, she just nodded and thanked him, adding his offer to the growing list of kindnesses she didn't know how to repay. That afternoon, Jake took her to Martha's Diner, the kind of small-town restaurant where everyone knew everyone and strangers were treated like long-lost friends. Martha herself, a round-faced woman with silver hair and laugh lines, fussed over Sarah like she was a beloved niece, bringing extra portions and insisting she try the homemade pie. You're looking peaked, honey, Martha declared, settling into the booth across from them with her own cup of coffee. Jake's been feeding you right, I hope. Martha's convinced that food can cure whatever ails you, Jake said with a smile. And, you know what? She's right more often than not. Sarah managed to eat more of the meal than she had expected, the first food that had actually tasted like something since her diagnosis. The normalcy of the setting, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, the smell of coffee and bacon was strangely comforting. For brief moments, she could almost forget why she was there, could almost pretend she was just a woman having lunch with a friend on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. After lunch, they walked through the small downtown area. Jake pointed out the history in the buildings, the bank that had survived the Depression, the theater that still showed movies on Friday nights, the courthouse where his parents had gotten married 35 years earlier. Cedar Creek wasn't just a place to him, it was a living story, a community held together by shared history and mutual care. It must be nice, Sarah said as they paused in front of the courthouse, to belong somewhere like this. To have roots that go so deep. It is, Jake agreed. But roots can be planted anywhere, if you're willing to tend them. Sometimes the strongest trees are the ones that had to work hardest to find good soil. His words stayed with her as he drove her back to the motel. She had spent her adult life moving from place to place, college in Dallas, graduate school in Austin, jobs that took her from Houston to San Antonio and back again. She had always seen her mobility as freedom, but now she wondered if it had been something else entirely. Maybe she had been running long before she got her diagnosis. Maybe she had been avoiding putting down roots because some part of her knew they could be torn up without warning. That evening, Sarah finally turned her phone back on and listened to her voicemails. David's voice got more strained with each message, and, by the last one, he was openly crying. Sarah, please. I don't know what I did wrong, but we can fix it. Whatever it is, we can work through it. Just please come home. please call me back. I love you more than anything in this world, and I can't lose you. Please. The raw pain in his voice broke something loose inside her chest. She had been so focused on protecting him from her pain that she hadn't considered how her disappearance was causing him different but equally devastating pain. In trying to spare him the truth, she was torturing him with uncertainty. She started to dial his number 3 separate times, but each time she chickened out before the call connected. How do you begin that conversation? How do you find the words to destroy someone's world? The phone felt heavy in her hands, weighted with all the conversations she wasn't ready to have. Finally, she composed a longer text message. David, I'm okay and I'm safe. I know I've scared you, and I'm sorry. Something has happened that I need time to process, and I need to figure out how to tell you about it. I love you more than words can express, and that's why this is so hard. Please trust me and give me a few more days. I promise I'll explain everything soon. His response was immediate. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. I love you. Come home. Sarah stared at those words for a long time. Together. The word that had become both her greatest comfort and her deepest source of pain. She wanted nothing more than to face this together, but how could she ask someone to face something that had no solution? How could she ask David to watch her die when he was supposed to be planning their wedding? She set the phone aside and walked to the window of her motel room. Across the parking lot, she could see the lights of Cedar Creek settling into another peaceful evening. Somewhere out there, Jake Thompson was probably checking on his cattle one last time before dark, walking the same land his family had worked for generations. Somewhere, Martha was probably closing up the diner, wiping down tables and turning off lights, secure in the rhythms of a life well lived. And, somewhere in Austin, David was pacing their apartment, probably staring at his phone and waiting for a call that would explain why the woman he loved had vanished without a trace. The weight of his worry pressed against her chest like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe. Sarah realized that her time of running was almost over. She couldn't hide in Cedar Creek forever, couldn't keep avoiding the conversations that needed to happen. But she also couldn't imagine finding the strength to have them. She was caught between two impossible choices: staying silent and watching the people she loved suffer from uncertainty, or telling the truth and watching them suffer from knowledge. As darkness settled over the small town, Sarah found herself thinking about Elizabeth Harper, the woman in the cemetery who had died at 34. Had she known it was coming? Had she had time to say goodbye, to make peace with the life she was leaving behind? Or had death taken her by surprise, leaving her with words unspoken and love unexpressed? The questions haunted her as she lay in the motel bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of a town at rest. Tomorrow would bring another day of borrowed time, another day of avoiding the truth that was waiting for her back home. But it would also bring another day with Jake, whose quiet strength had become an unexpected anchor in the storm of her life. She didn't know what tomorrow would hold, but, for the first time since her diagnosis, she was curious enough to find out. That, she supposed, was something like progress, even if she couldn't yet see where it might lead. Monday morning arrived with the kind of clear, bright sky that made everything seem possible, even when possibility felt like a foreign concept. Sarah woke before her alarm, having spent most of the night in that restless state between sleeping and waking where thoughts chase each other in endless circles. She had made a decision sometime in the dark hours before dawn, though she wasn't entirely sure what that decision was yet. Jake arrived at the motel just after 8, looking like he had already put in half a day's work. His boots were dusty, his shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, and he carried with him the scent of fresh air and honest labor that had become oddly comforting to Sarah over the past few days. "Roy's expecting us," he said as she climbed into his truck. "But I should warn you, he's got some strong opinions about foreign cars. Don't take it personally if he mutters a bit while he works." Roy's garage was exactly what Sarah expected: cluttered, oil-stained, and filled with the organized chaos that spoke of a man who knew where everything was even when it looked like nothing was in its proper place. Roy himself was a compact man in his 60s with grease-stained fingers and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Well, Missy, you picked a fine time to blow a radiator hose," he said after looking at her car. "But you're lucky it happened here instead of out on the highway in this heat. Could have been a lot worse." As Roy explained what needed to be done, Sarah found herself only half listening. The details of the repair seemed unimportant compared to the larger question of what she was going to do once her car was fixed. Where was she going to go? Back to Austin to face David and her parents? Somewhere else entirely, to continue the running that had brought her to Cedar Creek in the first place? I can have the part here by Wednesday, Roy was saying. Thursday morning at the latest. That work for you? Sarah nodded, adding another day or two to her unexpected exile. Jake seemed to sense her preoccupation because he suggested they get coffee while Roy worked on the initial diagnosis. They walked to Martha's Diner, where the breakfast crowd was winding down and the lunch preparations were beginning. You seem different this morning, Jake observed as they settled into their usual booth. Calmer, maybe, but also more. I don't know. Resolved? Sarah stirred sugar into her coffee and considered his words. Was she more resolved? She felt something had shifted during the long night, though she couldn't quite articulate what it was. I think I've realized that running away from something doesn't make it go away, she said finally. It just changes the location where you have to face it. Jake nodded slowly. That's a hard lesson to learn. I spent those 5 years in Dallas partly because I was running from the responsibility of this place, from the weight of 4 generations of family history. But it followed me anyway. Eventually, I realized that the thing I was running from was actually the thing that could save me. What if the thing you're running from can't save you? Sarah asked. What if it's the thing that's going to destroy you? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them fully understood yet. Jake studied her face, and she could see him processing her words, trying to understand what she was really asking. Sarah, he said gently, what aren't you telling me? The directness of the question caught her off guard. For 3 days, people had been asking if she was okay, offering vague support and gentle concern. But Jake was asking for the truth, and something about the way he asked made her want to give it to him. I'm dying, she said, the words falling from her lips before she could stop them. I have cancer, and I'm dying, and I ran away because I couldn't face telling the people I love that our time together is almost over. The silence that followed her confession was deafening. Martha's usual chatter seemed to fade into the background, and even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen sounded muted. Jake sat perfectly still, his coffee cup halfway to his lips, processing what she had just told him. I'm sorry, Sarah said quickly, suddenly mortified that she had dumped such devastating news on this kind stranger. I shouldn't have, you barely know me, and here I am. Stop, Jake said quietly, setting down his coffee cup and reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. Don't apologize for telling the truth. That took courage. His hand was warm and calloused, grounded in a way that made her feel less like she was floating away from her own life. For the first time since her diagnosis, someone knew her secret and the world hadn't ended. The sky was still blue outside the diner windows. Martha was still bustling around with her coffee pot. Life was continuing, even with this terrible knowledge sitting between them. How long? Jake asked, his voice gentle but steady. 6 months, maybe less. It's advanced. There's nothing they can do except make me comfortable. Jake absorbed this information with the same quiet steadiness he seemed to bring to everything else. He didn't gasp or cry or offer empty platitudes about staying positive. He just held her hand and let her words settle into the space between them. And the people back home don't know? My fiancé. My parents. My best friend. Nobody knows. I got the diagnosis on Thursday, and by Friday I was in my car driving toward nowhere because I couldn't face seeing the look in their eyes when I told them. The look of love? Jake asked. The look of people who care about you and want to help carry whatever burden you're facing? Sarah pulled her hand away, suddenly defensive. The look of pity. The look of people trying to figure out how to act around someone who's dying. The look of my fiancé realizing that the woman he planned to marry is going to leave him a widower before they ever get to be husband and wife. You don't think you're being a little unfair to them? The question stung because she had been asking herself the same thing for days. Maybe. But I'm also trying to protect them from months of watching me die. David deserves better than that. He deserves someone who can give him a future, not someone who's going to break his heart and, then, leave him alone." Jake was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in slow circles on the table. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than judgmental. "When my dad was sick, there was a period where we didn't know if he was going to make it. The doctors were saying things like prepare for the worst and get your affairs in order. It was the scariest time in my family's life." Sarah waited for him to continue, sensing there was more to the story. "But, you know what I remember most from that time? I remember how much closer we all became. I remember conversations with my dad that we never would have had if we hadn't been facing the possibility of losing him. I remember my mom telling him all the things she had been saving for someday. I remember my sister flying in from California and staying for 2 weeks, and how we all sat around his hospital bed playing cards and telling stories like we were at a family reunion instead of a death watch." "That's different," Sarah said. "Your dad got better. But we didn't know he would. For months, we lived with the knowledge that we might lose him. And, instead of pulling apart, it pulled us together. Instead of wasting time on stupid arguments or petty grievances, we focused on what mattered. We said the things we needed to say while we still had the chance." Sarah felt tears threatening again, but they were different from the tears she had been shedding for days. These weren't tears of despair but tears of recognition, of seeing a truth she had been avoiding. "You think I should go home," she said. "I think you should give the people who love you the chance to love you through this," Jake replied. "I think you should stop making decisions for them and let them make their own choices about how they want to spend whatever time they have left with you." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She had been so focused on protecting everyone else from her pain that she hadn't considered that her absence might be causing them even greater pain. She had been so afraid of being a burden that she had become a different kind of burden, the burden of not knowing, of loving someone who had simply disappeared. "I don't know how to tell them," she admitted. "I don't know how to find the words for something so impossible." "The same way you told me," Jake said simply. "With honesty. With courage. With trust that the people who love you are strong enough to handle the truth." They sat in silence for a while, both processing the weight of what had been shared. Around them, the diner continued its normal rhythms, coffee being poured, orders being taken, the comfortable chatter of a community at the start of another day. The normalcy of it was both comforting and surreal. "There's something else," Sarah said finally. "I keep thinking about my fiancé, about what this is going to do to him. We were supposed to get married in 6 months. We had this whole life planned out, kids, a house with a white picket fence, growing old together. Now all of that is gone, and I don't know how to tell him that the future we've been planning doesn't exist anymore." Jake considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe the question isn't how to tell him that future doesn't exist. Maybe the question is how to create a different kind of future with the time you have left." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe you're approaching this backward. Instead of thinking about all the things you won't get to do, maybe think about the things you still can do. Instead of focusing on the life you won't have, focus on the life you still do have." Sarah stared at him, something shifting inside her chest. It was a subtle reframing, but it changed everything. Instead of seeing her diagnosis as an ending, what if she saw it as a different kind of beginning? Instead of focusing on dying, what if she focused on living, really living, for whatever time she had left? "You make it sound simple," she said. "Simple, maybe. Easy? Not so much." Jake smiled sadly. "But most things worth doing aren't easy." After they left the diner, Jake took Sarah to a place he called his thinking spot, a hill on his property that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding countryside. They sat on a fallen log under an old oak tree, watching cattle graze in the distance and hawks circle overhead. "I used to come here when I was a kid and my parents would fight," Jake said. "Later, I came here when I was trying to decide whether to take the job in Dallas. After Dad got sick, I came here to figure out whether to move back home. There's something about this place that helps me see clearly." Sarah could understand why. The view was expansive but not overwhelming, beautiful but not distracting. It was the kind of place that invited contemplation, that made big decisions feel possible rather than paralyzing. "I called David last night," she said suddenly. "I didn't talk to him, but I listened to his voicemails. He's scared, Jake. He's terrified that something has happened to me, and I'm putting him through that because I'm too afraid to have a difficult conversation." "Fear makes us do things that don't match who we really are," Jake observed. "The question is, who do you really want to be in this situation?" It was a profound question, one that cut through all the noise and confusion to the heart of what mattered. Who did she want to be? The woman who ran away when things got difficult? Or the woman who faced impossible circumstances with grace and courage? "I want to be someone who loves the people in her life enough to give them the chance to love her back," Sarah said slowly. "Even if that love is complicated and painful and temporary." "That sounds like a pretty good person to be," Jake replied. As the afternoon wore on, they talked about everything and nothing: Jake's childhood on the ranch, Sarah's work as a graphic designer, their shared love of old movies and terrible puns. It was the kind of conversation that reminded Sarah why she had fallen in love with life in the first place, why the prospect of leaving it behind was so devastating. But it was also the kind of conversation that reminded her that life was happening right now, in this moment, on this hill, with this unexpected friend who had shown her what courage looked like. She was still dying, but she was also still living, and maybe that was enough to start with. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Jake turned to her with a serious expression. "Sarah, I want you to know that whatever you decide to do, you don't have to do it alone. I know we barely know each other, but you've become important to me. If you need someone to drive you home, or someone to be there when you tell your family, or just someone to sit with you when things get scary, I'm here." The offer was so unexpected and generous that it left Sarah speechless for a moment. This man who owed her nothing was offering her everything: his time, his support, his presence during the most difficult period of her life. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do that for someone you just met?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. When he spoke, his voice was soft but certain. "Because sometimes life puts people in your path exactly when you need them most. Because my dad's illness taught me that time is precious and connections matter. Because you're brave enough to tell the truth about impossible things, and that's rare in this world." He paused, then continued with a slight smile. "And because yesterday, you said something to me that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. You said you couldn't face this alone. Well, now you don't have to." Sarah felt something break open inside her chest, not the painful breaking that had been happening for days, but a different kind of breaking, like dawn breaking over the horizon. For the first time since her diagnosis, she felt like she could breathe fully. "Okay," she said, the word coming out stronger than she expected. "Okay. I want to go home. I want to tell David and my parents and everyone who loves me. I want to stop running and start living, whatever that looks like now." Jake nodded, his expression full of quiet pride. "When do you want to leave?" "Tomorrow morning." "I don't think I can wait any longer, and I don't think they should have to." As they drove back to town in the gathering darkness, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in days: hope. Not hope that her diagnosis would change or that some miracle cure would appear, but hope that she could face whatever came next with dignity and courage. Hope that the people who loved her were strong enough to handle the truth. Hope that however much time she had left, it could be time worth living. She still didn't know how she was going to find the words to tell David that their wedding would never happen, or how she was going to explain to her parents that they would have to bury another child. But she knew that Jake was right: she didn't have to face it alone. She had spent so much time focusing on what she was losing that she had forgotten to appreciate what she still had: people who loved her, time that was still hers to spend, and, now, unexpectedly, a friend who had shown her that even in the darkest moments, human connection could provide light. The next morning, as Cedar Creek faded in her rearview mirror and Austin grew larger on the horizon, Sarah wasn't sure what the future would hold. But, for the first time since the terrible phone call had changed everything, she was driving toward her life instead of away from it. And that, she thought, was courage enough to start with. Jake followed behind her in his truck, true to his promise that she wouldn't have to face this alone. In her purse, her phone buzzed with another call from David. This time, she answered it. David? It's me. I'm coming home. And, there's something I need to tell you.